Let me tell you something dumb about HOAs, okay?
Yes.
We get this knocking on the door, and I'm like, who is knocking on my door? Alexa didn't go off, nothing. So I go out. This guy, we have construction being done. There are certain basic elements you have to have for, human decency rights. So there's like a porta potty station and like this little cleaning station. They're like, you need to move this. This is unappealing to our curb appeal. Okay, I get it. All right, buddy. So what do you want me to tell the workers about you wanting to violate their basic human rights? And they're like, what? I'm like, you're basically asking people to say, oh, you can't wash up, go to the bathroom, or anything. You just have to get here and work. And they didn't like the fact that, like, some of the workers, they come, I set up this little patio area out front. So, like, they can sit down, eat their lunch, do their whole thing, relax for a minute. This is unappealing. So, what? Like, you want me to say screw it to human rights because you don't like the fact that their construction workers are, like, sitting eating their lunch?
These things don't happen like they did back in the day with Sears. You're not going to be able to build a house, build a pool, or anything else it's already said and done, and then just install it and that's it. No, you have to do a lot of things that go with that.
Right. Like people have to be able to go to the bathroom. They should be able to sit down and they're like, well, why can't you just do that in the backyard? Well, it's a construction zone. It's a literal, it looks like a mine went off back there. Like, he's like trying to get all snooty, and I'm not a person you should get uppity with because I go from being super nice Chels to super mean Chels. And so I was like, no, that's perfectly fine. So I turned my little phone on to record. I was like, if you wouldn't mind, just for my lawyer's purposes, if you would just mind stating can't, what you don't like, why you don't like it, and why you think it's okay to violate human rights and decency. And he was like, what? I was like, OSHA laws and regulations. I just need to know for my lawyer's purposes when you try to fine us for this, just because I'm not covering that $12,000 fine. So if we could just document this, then that would be great. And he was like, well, we can give an extension, but we would really prefer that it's just done in the backyard. I'm like, no, that's fine. Just say what I need, what you're feeling. And he was like, well, we'll discuss this when your husband's home. I was like, my husband is home, but you're not going to be talking to my husband. You're going to be talking with me because as a homeowner, that is what you should be doing. He's like, well, your husband's here. Like, dude, listen here, little white old man. My 30-second trip to take my dog outside really quick turned into a 5-minute discussion and debate with this dude because I am not only a woman, but I have construction people that are just trying to sit and enjoy their lunch.
Didn't we already have this discussion about women's roles in the household?
Oh, I can tell you, it is not the man that runs this house. So let's just make that very clear.
Well, of course, it's your responsibility. You're the woman. It's your responsibility to take care of the house.
Yeah.
Oh man,
No, Mac. But yes,
I
that is
know.
just how are we possibly trying to violate basic federal law? Like, you are trying to get rid of federal law for your age. I live in a cul-de-sac. We are a gated community. Nobody can come in here. What are you doing?
And by the way, just in case you try to use this against me for that anything said done because this is being recorded, I will suggest and state again, this is sarcasm when I stated that whole
Oh,
fact
of
about
course.
what a Roman's
That's
role.
yes.
And
No,
it's
it was
been
just
said, it's been confirmed. Now you can't use it against me.
sarcasm 101. Yeah.
All right, folks. We are here. We are live. We are back. We are something of a rant, but hello, everybody. Welcome to Beyond the Pen, where me and Chelsea in this episode talk about pretty much anything and everything that it involves publishing world, and also talk a little bit about historical fiction and is it fact or fiction? Where is the blend?
Okay, Mac. We can go with that. That was a cool line. We'll use that. That works. I feel like you already explained that it was, but that's fine. We can do that. We're going to start our own genre.
Hey, it's those key words. It's those key words. We already discussed this last week.
Yes. Freaking hate genres.
But it's funny that, when we talk about historical fiction, when we talk about how it's impacting the publishing world, how it's impacting readers' lives. There is the sense of, you know, where do you find that balance between facts and fiction? Even though it's even stated historical fiction, there still has to be somewhat of a balance, though. You know,
Oh, absolutely. And I think there's a lot of times people don't understand the fiction part. For example, Danielle M. Morsino. She does a story about angels that got locked out of heaven and got a huge uproar about it because they were trying to say that she went against religion and did everything like that. And it's a fiction book. It is fake. She made this up, and everybody was like, you're declaring whatever. So I think a lot of times readers kind of get lost into it too by making those small little comparisons in history or religion, and get into their feelings. And I think that's something that is interesting about historical fiction in itself, is because a lot of times historical fiction takes place as an outsider during a historical event, right? So in this case, it was slavery, shortly after abolishing slavery and the process that they went through. And there's a lot of emotion in this book. There is a lot of people that will be upset reading this book, but it's a lovely story. It's a beautiful story. And I think it's one of the great things with historical fiction is it makes you stop when you read it and go, wait a second, is this is this something that actually happened, or is this part of the fake part? So I think reading and writing historical fiction also brings that curiosity of to make people go back and actually relearn about history that maybe you learned about in eighth grade and forgot since then. So it's kind of that fun blend too. But please, readers, remember, if it says fiction in it, it's not real. Don't get upset. Don't hate the authors. Go and cause these uprisings over it. Just reach out or put the book down. Don't get in your feels.
basically, what you're saying is use common sense.
That's so. Did you know you can't use the phrase common sense to describe people anymore because it's considered an insult? If you go, "Oh, I have no common sense." I can tell you right now. I am one of those people where it's one of the reasons I'm not allowed to go anywhere by myself. And I've had it in conventions and stuff where people will start slowly leading me away, and I don't realize it just because I'm talking or I'm distracted or whatever. And Danny and Corey will be like, Chelsea, where the hell are you? Go get back over here. Don't let them hurt you. And I'm like, oh, when did you guys get over there? And it's because I'm one of those people that is easily kidnapped, I guess. I don't know. But it's why I don't go anywhere by myself. It's why if I do go, I have my headphones in. Like, don't talk to me. I'm gonna get like sucked into some crazy trap, and you're gonna say I need to go save the world or something. I don't know. It's considered an insult now if you tell somebody like, "Hey, you have no common sense." Like, apparently, you can harm their fragile constitutions, and it can be, yeah. It's a whole thing about their mentality and their mental health. So if you say it and it can be upsetting to somebody, you're not supposed to do it, Mac.
Yeah, well, I come from a generation that really doesn't really truly care too much about people's
Agreed.
feelings when the truth is involved. Ladies and gentlemen, facts are facts.
Yes.
If you don't like the fact, well then sorry, but that's the truth. The truth is the truth no matter what. Now, here's the thing about it. You can
Okay.
always put a different perspective on the truth.
That's a lie. If you change
I
the
know,
truth, it's a lie. You can't do that.
but that's what's happening today.
That is very true.
The truth may be, let's put it this way, and I know I'm gonna hit a lot of bad bad mojo coming my way on this one.
I kind of want a little hostile mail. Not hate mail, just hostile mail.
We're gonna get the here's where the chaos starts to come into play a little bit. Yeah, the whole idea about gender and gender roles.
Oh, we can't do this. We can't do
Well,
it.
hear me out. It's gender roles in general. Okay, the
Okay.
perspective
Okay.
of traditional
Hmm.
comparative to modern, because there are two different viewpoints on what roles we have. And even in the book that we're going to be talking about with our next author, Deirdre Sinnott, she wrote a book called The Third Mrs. Galway. And it's a great historical novel. And just like Chelsea said, it deals with a lot of a time where abolitionism was still considered treason to the government, as well as, depending on where you were at, as well as enslavement, and very much the idea of relationships that are involved around that. But one of the major subtext that's in this is the roles that women play in the household or in the relationship itself. And that's why I'm talking about when it comes to gender and gender roles. I am talking about truth, okay? Because this is the truth. Facts were facts. Historical facts are that women only were there to do two things. One is to give the man an heir. That's it. The other one was to take care of the house. That's it. Anything that was outside of the house, the woman had no say in anything. They were told where they had to go, where they needed to be, how they needed to be dressed, how they were supposed to act. They even had institutions, female institutions, that taught young women, especially orphaned women, how to act so that they could find a mate.
I'm telling you, Mac, I am so thankful that I was born during this time.
I'm so thankful you were.
I know. I love my Converse. I love my jeans and it's pretty much 90% of my wardrobe. Black, gray, green, and red. Like that's it. I can't do those bright colors. I don't want to be like 50 layers deep in clothing. Like that just sounds miserable.
You don't want to get tuberculosis very that so
I
quickly.
know it's weird. It seems like I'm like, ooh, polio, mumps, so my thing. But believe it or not, no, not a fan. I I I enjoy vaccines. I like antibiotics. I like to be able to take cold medicine that knocks me out so I don't even know that I have a cold until I wake up 3 days later and I'm magically cured. Like I am very much into that modern times. Like, yay, modern.
You're giving way too much out on how to get rid of you than anything else. You've already told us how we how we can
You know.
lead you so easily away from other people. By the way, Corey or Danielle, when you're listening to this, make sure you have one of those backpacks that has that
The
leash,
leash?
like
Yeah.
yeah, on her.
One of our first conventions, we did GalaxyCon Columbus last year. And the whole time, Corey told her because he wasn't able to go, he was like, Danny, you do not leave her. You do not let her wander. If she goes to the bathroom, you have to stand by because and like wait outside because she's just going to assume you went back somewhere. She has no sense of direction. I'm getting better at it, but the problem is especially I don't know if it's just my personality or the fact that I'm an author, but if I see something like I start spinning a story and then I start wandering aimlessly and just like thinking of this story, and even Danny's just been like, Chels, I was standing right here, how did you slip by me? And I'm like, I don't know, I just walked out. And then it turned out there were two exits to the bathroom, which is just not good for Chels. But yeah, modern day times. But meanwhile, I know how to. I did Boy Scouts instead of Girl Scouts. I used to sneak with a couple friends when I was younger, so I know camping. I know how to fish. I don't like the skinning and gutting part. Not a fan. I can shoot a bow. I can shoot a gun. Like I'm a crack shot. If I can get to a weapon, I'll be good.
Well, yeah, again, true, but I state this again. No, I can't see Chelsea in a corset. I can't see Chelsea in this big furrowed skirt and these puffed up shoulders and the hair all the way. No, I can't do it. I can't see her in that style.
We have a super top secret. We are doing a cosplay calendar for the realm and the veil. So some of this might actually happen, and there will be photo proof.
Oh my gosh.
And I'm gonna make sure to record the commentary between these photos just so everybody can know how absolutely miserable the whole experience was. Or maybe it'll be super fun. Danny will be there, so maybe it'll be super fun.
I have to get some of the audio from that.
It's just gonna hurt.
Well, yeah, because you're constricting your ribs. You're constricting your breathing. That's why so many women, one, died, passed out. Yeah, that's why smelling salts were definitely invented. Two, because during that time, humidity, especially when you're talking about South in general is just humidity. It was even worse back then too, because you remember this was during the time of the Industrial Revolution too.
Oh, and the
So
smog, and yes, no, no. See, I'm
yeah,
good.
yeah. So that's why a lot of women. That's why a lot of men were always looking out for women and saying, are you going to be, fainting soon? Because they would always be, fanning themselves with something just to stay cool. Because again, restriction of air, because of the corsets, ribs were basically puncturing the lungs because the style of
The steel
what
cages.
yeah, basically because of the styles of women's fashion back then. It went from, if you were considered a curvy woman, you were considered a great mate because of the fact that you had hips that were big enough to give birth. But also, it meant that you had money, because if you had enough money to eat back then to
Who
look
was
like
stuck?
that, I mean, food was scarce. Exactly. But if you had money, it was not a big thing. So again, it was more of a societal, social ranking, basically. And then during the turn of the century in the 1900s, it came down to women had to be skinny. You had to look like you had that, um,
Hourglass.
the hourglass figure. So again, and this is a very important. There's a reason why we're talking about all of this, is because one, it gives you an insight into the timeline that Deidre was talking about in her book that she's explaining to you. And it is very important to understand the styles. It's understand anything that involves society in general.
Yes, they're great. The ability to go somewhere when you wanted to be dress however, and a lot of times when you were those more high-born women, you had even more layers and you stood out even more. So in situations like helping slaves from through the underground railroad and all of those things, you stood out more, and you weren't expected to be doing or caught in certain areas that this railroad ran through. So it's a lot about full immersion that I feel like she did. She brought you into the culture of the timeline, the clothes of the timeline, the interactions between whites and African Americans, and everything that was that time, the shift in how people thought and recognized other races. And it was huge.
Yeah, and it was very much, the terminology in itself is very important too, because again, you notice that Chelsea said white and black back then. And I'm going to say the nicer version of the N word here, because one, I can, because I'm black, so get mad at me about it. But it's also historical. It's historically correct too that black people were named Negroes. Uh, there's the other N word, but we won't go to that part because it's an arrogant word to say, because it means that you have a superiority complex, basically, if you have to use that word.
Well, and it was meant as a derogatory term, obviously, which is kind of ironic with the way that people kind of use it now. But it was meant to just say that they were stupid and worthless, and it was thrown around to make sure that it was cemented into their brain that, like, hey, this is what you are. And the way, and it's one of those trigger warnings that is in the book. So be very cautious when you enter into this. And I think she does a really great job at warning you of the different themes that are in the story, which I have found not all historical fiction does. So, but I feel like, again, you should know you're reading historical fiction. It's probably not going to be the up and coming fun times where everybody was, everything was love and happiness, unless you're doing it 70s, I guess.
Even then, it's still a little bit difficult too, because we were still under civil rights at that point too. But again, when you look at the cover of it too, I mean,
Yes.
it's pretty blatant that it's, oh no, this is definitely not your modern age story. Um, but it also gives a lot of good viewpoints on when we're looking at historical fiction, when we're looking at this specific era, that you have to be very correct. You have to be right on point when it comes to the slang, when it comes to the terminology, when it comes to specific organizations. Even if you're making them up, you still have to have a baseline for all of that. And that's where that blend of fact and fiction come into play. That's why, again, historical fiction. Come on, let's figure this out. But one of the other things I really enjoyed about it is the fact that when we're talking about perspectives, and in her writing style of third person duality, it is a sense that, and I know this is going to come up in some people's minds of this is a white woman thinking that she knows what a black woman would think, yada yada. Again, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, use your common sense and understand. Again, I don't mean that in terms of a uh,
Negative man.
insult to you. Yeah, a negative manner. It's the truth, common sense. Use your common sense, your God given sense that it's going to happen. Okay.
And she did
She's,
years of
oh,
research.
years of research.
She sat down and she really dove into this world that she was creating and copying to bring a real life experience to it. She read the old articles and old newspapers. She went into the backgrounds a lot of these organizations, and I think it's there. I don't think there's anything wrong. I think, okay, let me correct that. She did it what I would call the right way. She didn't try to color it as,
No pun intended.
but she went at it in a way that was like, this is how terrible this was. I'm not going to make it sound better just because of, being white or being a person who lives in New York and did past papers and research on the city that she had grown up in. But she got into the down and dirty of how this woman would feel. And she will openly admit that it may not be exactly how it was, but she did her best. Instead of other times when you read historical fiction and it's a white woman writing a black woman's perspective, or a black woman writing a white woman's perspective, or a guy doing a woman's perspective. Sometimes you have those books where it's like, okay, there's no way this is how this went down. As being a person like that, this is not how it happened. Deirdre did a fantastic job, in my opinion. Again, I'm a white girl. I don't know the perspective of a black woman in the 1800s, but you were able to tell the difference between her white character and her black slave runaway. And they had those different views on the world, and they kind of taught each other a bit, which I thought was the best way to approach something like that.
Absolutely. And here's the common thread out of both those perspectives. It's a woman's perspective. That's what she wrote from. She didn't write from a white woman's perspective or a black woman's perspective. She wrote from a woman's perspective. And understanding that this is not a younger woman's perspective. This is someone who has lived a life. She will admit it so easily that she started writing this in her 60s, which also gives the perspective of what life experience will give you. And when you do the research on whatever topic you are talking about, specifically historical fiction, that you have some type of perspective from your own life to come pull from. So if you are a mother, then guess what? Writing about giving birth, if you gave birth to your children and not adopted them, because motherhood comes in different perspectives, in different ways, we know this. But when we're talking specifically about physical birth, bloodline, we are talking about the pain. They know the pain. And going from historical point of view of that, historical research, excuse me, you will know that majority of the women during that time, even if they had one, two, five, 12 different children, that 13th will kill them.
It was natural, all of it
Yeah,
back then. We didn't have the lovely
all of
dresses
it. Yeah,
nowadays. Full on
no,
natural in a barn. Okay, I don't know about the
yeah.
barn. I'm assuming somebody did.
Oh, yeah, majority. Yeah, most likely. Yeah, that's an easy assumption that was there, but it was always given on. There was birth on hay because the mattresses were made out of hay. There was no springs, no nothing like that. It was hay and string.
So unsanitary. Even nowadays, this is going to be another tangent. Do you ever watch TV, like the TV shows, like the
No, I
crime shows? I know, Mac, you're not a really big TV guy.
no.
When you go through and you're watching these shows and you just see people that'll, especially when we've been watching Bar Rescue and we love watching the kitchen shows and stuff like that. And so I watch it and you just see them like touch the raw food and then like wipe their face or do whatever. And like it makes my skin physically crawl. I'm just like, you dirty, dirty, dirty. But to think of being back in that time where you're literally giving birth in the dirt or in the hay or no clean hands because I guess hand washing is a new thing, and it's just it's a crazy what people went through back then, and that's from a perspective of a white person. Slaves, when they gave birth, it was different, and I think it's one of the things that she got when she's talking about her runaway slave is pregnant during this entire thing, and
Mhm.
to be in a position like she is as a slave who was obviously had to went through that whole entire experience as a slave and is trying to run away to give herself and her child a better opportunity. I don't think there's anybody alive today that can actually completely understand that situation. Like, how do you possibly, what is there to draw from in order to
Yeah,
get to that?
yeah.
But I think she did a really good job assuming how it would be.
And here's something that I want people to understand too is that even if that's why I brought it up, like she wrote from a woman's point of view, not
Yes.
just a black woman's, not a white woman's, just a woman's point of view, is the fact that when you are pregnant, especially when you're about to burst, okay, the fact is walking alone can be and just completely out of your mind hard. It's one of the it's the hardest thing because again, you go from something barely noticeable, not noticeable at all of a sudden now you got this 10-pound bullet bowl.
There we go. That's a different perspective, though. As a guy, you're assuming it's what, 5, 10 pounds you're carrying around? It's not. It's like 20 to 30 pounds up
But
front.
again, yeah, I'm thinking of like, okay, what's their actual weight? Add on a few more pounds worth of the water that's that's based in there
Yeah,
too.
the amniotic fluid, the blood, the baby, the placenta, the additional skin around, the fat cord. Yeah.
Everything, and that's not including the top part too. That's just the stomach, because again, a woman's chest biologically will get bigger because of the milk. But again, think about the idea that you are a woman who's under duress with with child. You are 9 months pregnant. You're walking 10, 15 miles a day, give or take, depending on how the distance is between them. And we find out that, historically, the cities were the town is about 10 miles for the horses to be able to get changed
Switched
out, the
out.
tires get switched, wagons switched out, yada yada yada. There's a lot of planning that goes into that distance. But think about it: you're under duress at night. You're with child.
And you know what happens if you get caught. You know
You
what's
get
going to happen when you get caught. So it comes down
exactly.
to fight or flight. And obviously, she chose to fight to make that journey
Hmm.
and to go through the entire thing. And I think that's one of the biggest parts of historical fiction when you do it right, like
Yeah.
Deidre did. She went and she captured what a real life experience would be during a terrible time in American history. And she made, when you read it, you stop and you wonder and you realize it's not that long ago. We are not an old country.
No,
We were established 1776. Like that's not that long ago. It seems like it in the grand scheme of things, but country wise,
we are babies.
right, we're maybe in that toddler stage now, guys. Like, whoo.
Hey, we finally got out of diapers. We still got a lot of shit on us, but excuse my language.
Yes.
Frank, take that part out.
Do not take that part out. But it goes through, and it's one of the she made a captivating story, which as you go through and you read, I guarantee half the readers are going to go and they're going to look into slavery again. You're going to
Right.
look in and see, okay, like was it really just in this time? Like that's not that long. Like couldn't have been in the 1800s. You assume this stuff happened so long ago, and it really didn't. And that's why I like historical fiction, is because it reminds you of those small things that happened in his, not that slavery was a small thing, that's not what I'm saying, but it
Right.
reminds you of those pieces of history that you kind of, it's not that you forget about them, but you almost kind of do. Like you understand
Hmm.
that it happened, but you don't understand the full extent of it anymore. Because as adults, especially as we get older, you get so caught up in your own life that you almost forget parts of history that are important to remember, whether it's slavery, the civil rights movement, the Civil War, the both world wars. Like those are important parts of our history, and I think that when you are able to read a historical fiction novel, it reminds you. And maybe not in this case in a fun, more exciting way, but
Right.
it makes you stop and think about it. And that's what it's
Yeah.
supposed to be there for.
Like she said earlier, we're not that old of a country. Technically, you know, the Pilgrims got here, around November of 1620. When you Google it, it says November 11th, 1620. So I'm presuming they base that off of actual documentation. But again, we're only 403 years old, almost 400, yeah, about 403 and a half years old, comparative to a lot of the countries that have been around for generations. I mean, Israel, again, Israel's one of the oldest, still today, oldest countries still around. Same thing with Egypt. I mean, those are ancient. Rome. Again, we're talking about a life that's been around. And we're also talking about a topic that's been around since those times.
Oh, it's from the beginning of time, and I think that's something
Basically, yeah.
that is fascinating. Is there is a novel about Egypt out there, the historical doctrine of a great city, I think is what it's called, and it has
Hmm.
like Rome and Egypt and all of those in them, and the fact that it's a trade as old as time, and
It is.
the abuse that goes through, and the fact that people think they are higher than others has always been astounding to me, and I find it to be fascinating.
Yep.
As terrible as it is, I find it very fascinating that some people think that they are somehow better than others because of where or when you were born. The arrogance of man, like that is why the greatest countries and cities and everything always fall, is because of the arrogance of man. And it is
Hmm.
fascinating. It's not because of a girl, it's because of a guy who was too prideful and arrogant and he thought he should have something that wasn't his.
Speaking of that's another thing that happens a lot too, especially when we're talking about this book about this specific time, is that when you are talking about roles in the household, when you're talking about roles in society, women's roles were not very much higher than an enslaved person of color. Here's the thing that a lot of people forget about history is that blacks were not, when coming to the United States, blacks were not just the only slaves.
The Irish,
You still had the Irish, you had even the English were
the
enslaved at some
Italians,
points.
yeah, like the
Italians,
Irish were the
everybody.
first ones to start building the railroad. They when
Hmm.
they fell, the owners of them just kicked them into the railway and buried over them. The railroad is
Yeah,
literally built on the backs and bones of Irishmen,
yeah.
and it's terrible. But the benefit that Irish had is, and the English had, it's not hard to change an accent.
No,
Like
it's
all
not.
they had to do was to change the way that this their voice sounded, and it wasn't easy to get away. But back then black people were worth more than Irishmen. Irishmen
Hmm.
were worth less.
Yeah.
But it's
And
just, it was easier for Irishmen to escape than it is for a black person to escape. You can change your accent, you can't change color of your skin. So you
nope.
can't just slip away and be like, no, I am now Smith and nobody, I am not Irish or I'm not black. It wasn't that easy. It was just for some reason, I think it's, I don't know if it was a giving up of Irish slaves or what, but, or maybe it was just too easy to lose them. I'm not 100%. I'm going to have to do research on that, on when they stopped keeping Irish slaves as much as they did black slaves. But I do know one of the things that they used to do is intermingle Irish and black people to create the ultimate slave, is literally what it's called. Look it up. It was
It's
the
true.
ultimate because they had the structure and build of a black person and the endurance of an Irish person. So it was considered the ultimate slave, and they would trace the lineage and they would get more for them at slave markets, which is ridiculous. They're not animals. Like, you can't, it's not crossbreeding a dog, which again is very wrong. You should not breed ducks like that. It's wrong. But it was just an insane, who comes up, like, there has to be a, they have to be in like the seventh circle of hell. Like, who is
Uh,
just sitting there like, hey, these two slave races are pretty cool. It'd be awesome.
I would think they're more in the eighth or the ninth, but we'll go with the seventh. That's fine. Thankfully, I didn't live back then too, because I am also a mix of African American and Western European, i.e., Irish. So I would definitely be that breed. That would suck really bad for me. Like you said, it's easier for you to change your accent than it is to change the color of your skin. And one of the things of being a mulatto is the fact that you still have the capability of mulatto is mixed. So someone that's mixed of a black race to a white race. I'm mulatto. I would be considered
Really?
mulatto. Yes,
That is fascinating. That's such a cute name.
it is. It's a good title, a good label to have, because you get the best of both worlds in a sense. But it also made it a lot more difficult for you to be accepted by either
By
side.
their race, yeah.
But one of the things that mulattoes were able to do, to a sense, was they were able to pass off as Spaniards,
Yes.
because the lighter your tan was. Like, if you look at my youngest, um, he is a mixture of mulatto and white, which means that he still has that great Spanish tan per se.
Mhm.
So as he gets older, he'll be looked at as a little bit different than me. And then if you look at my oldest is white, so he'd be easy to get past her easily. Seriously, I married a white woman. I have my oldest son is white. My youngest son is caramel.
Perfect tan year round. Like, that's just not even,
Exactly.
do you see,
I
this is
know,
actually my skin color. This is what I look like. Like,
but they both, yeah, pale can be, we know. But the fact is that they both still um, can burn. They actually can get red.
I have to say, my son, he used to stay outside 24/7 in the sun in Florida.
Mhm.
We're quarter mile from the beach. Stay
Yeah.
outside all day long. That little boy had so much Irish in him, he didn't even burn. Like, he was like, the sun was too scared to touch him. Like, just like, nope, he's fine. Pasty little
It's the
ghost boy.
bloodline. Yeah,
Yes,
it's the
it's
bloodline.
Irish. I'm telling you. But
Yeah, it is.
we're going back to our conversation. The women back then were basically legal slaves as well, because
Yeah.
you could beat your wife, you
Yep.
could rape your wife, you could
Yep.
kill your wife with if you had reason to. You could make them do whatever you wanted, and there was
Hmm.
nothing they could do. They had no protection. You
Yeah.
couldn't go and call the cops if your husband decided to beat the hell out of you. You couldn't
Yeah.
call the cops if you were raped on the street. You couldn't if you were battered, bruised, anything like that. It was a husband's right.
Oh, by the way, it was your fault too.
Yes. Oh, of course.
That's all your fault. Here's the thing: you can't do an abortion either. There's no such thing as abortion either. So you had to have the child, and the only way that you get rid of the child is to give it up to the church,
Or backyard, alleyway
or
stuff.
just kill
Or
them.
if
Yeah.
your husband was pissed off one night and wasn't sure you were faithful because he was wasted and shoved you down
Yep.
the stairs. Like, there was the
Oh
the
darn.
rights between women and slaves were parallel. They were nearly the same, only you couldn't sell your wife.
Well,
I was about
no,
to say, wait a second. Yes, you could. Yes, you could.
you
And
could.
then if your husband was a real butthead, then
Mm-hmm.
he could divorce you and ruin your life for anybody, cast you out on the street, keep your children from you, not
Mm-hmm.
allow you a home, a job, because a lot of time women were not allowed to have jobs,
Yeah.
and you would be left with nothing.
Or if they were really evil, they could put you in an asylum and say that you just
Yeah, women's hysteria. Yeah. All they have to
women's
do is say
hysteria.
we're hysterical, and off you go to get experimented on. Those fun new lobotomies that started, and shock
Mm-hmm.
therapy, and
Yeah, they would pay the doctors too to say that to agree that you were insane, and that was a way that you could disappear, and then they could just divorce you straight
yes.
up easily. It was completely legal. Having said all of that, understanding the terms and conditions per se to
Mhm.
historical fiction and some of the rules, some of the things that you have to do to make this at least
Plausible.
plausible in some way, shape, or form, and to help with that immersion into the story itself. But you have to do your research. You have to be able to go to all these sources that are that have been what's the word I want to say validated, that they are verified, they are consistently verified over time, and even if someone doesn't like the truth, it's still the truth.
Oftentimes, the truth is not pretty, and it's not
No.
neat or tied with a bow. And I think that's something that has been lost over the last 10, 15 years is if they're taking things out of history books. They're,
Yeah.
like the Battle of Wounded Knee and the Trail of Tears. Like those are no longer in the American history books.
Yeah.
And that's terrible. And that's when I
Yeah.
think some of these weird books, like the historical fiction, when you find those random things, it teaches you something that you may not have learned either, because history is changing.
Yeah.
What we have previously said and taught our children is too harmful for them now. So we are coloring history, not pun intended. We are changing it to make it more palatable to people. And
Yeah.
history is not supposed to be pretty. It's
No.
supposed to be a learning experience. Even
Yeah.
in your life, when you go through, you look back and you think of horrible things you've done, mistakes you've made, all of the missed opportunities or guilt or anything that you have in your life. It's the same thing for a broad country history. It's growing, evolving, and changing too, but you can't forget about those painful things. You have to learn from them. And I
Yeah.
think a lot of times we're kind of losing that and losing that knowledge. So even if it is a historical fiction novel, it'll pique curiosity and it keeps people wanting to learn and imparts a bigger impression on you when you get something like these stories. Because I don't know about anybody else, but sometimes I don't feel like reading a biography. Like I just want to go to a fake world, even if it has a historical basis, and be one of those characters instead of somebody that I know or may have heard of.
And it also makes sense to understand when you're watching this stuff, when you're looking at this stuff, when you're reading about it, that noted that yes, it is a historical fiction, noted that it is truth in some way, shape, or form. Just because you don't feel that it makes sense in a way, or that you don't like what they were doing, you have to understand that it is still the truth. You still have to understand that it is still relevant, and that people can make a difference if they learn about this stuff. Because if one of the greatest lines I will always state is true to this, is that if you do not learn about history, it will repeat itself. We've seen it too many times when people have destroyed something they didn't like. Look at World War II. Most of the Jewish history is destroyed during the Holocaust. Most of it disappeared, i.e., even with the families that were destroyed and ended. Those bloodlines are done, gone, period. End of discussion on that. If you don't learn what happened before us, you will lose it, because we're already starting to repeat a majority of history right now by getting rid of specific cultures, specific ideas, specific people in general.
The world isn't meant to make you comfortable. And I think that's a misinterpretation too. It's not about creating this perfect place for everybody wants a perfect place to grow up in and live
Yeah,
in. The sad fact is it's not a reality. It's not a possibility. And as much as you want to fight for something like that, you have to be willing to face. It's not even just about learning the history, it's understanding history and learning from it and not ignoring it. Because I feel like a lot of times, especially in schools and stuff nowadays, we're just like, oh no, that's not important enough for anybody to go over. We don't need to worry about that. But you do, because it's not just, hey, we shouldn't have slaves. It's, hey, you shouldn't treat anybody less than a human being. You should give them, everybody deserves basic human rights. It's not about necessarily understanding that America had slavery, which obviously, guys, we did. But it's understanding it's the actions of how we treated people and what we thought of them and why just skin color or where we were from made us better than somebody else. And I think that's what's getting lost nowadays. Is okay, sure, we don't have slavery, right? But we still treat other people like they're lower than we are. We still don't like certain races. We still don't like people from other countries. It's the exact same mentality. We're just not whipping and whipping them or taking control of their lives. Instead, we're cutting them out, treating them disrespectful, and assuming that because we don't have a title on it like slavery, that we're somehow better than we were in the past. And we're not.
that's true. And to the point, yes, there's still a little bit of slavery, but it's legalized now in a sense, because there's ways
The
to
workforce.
uh, exactly there, that too. Well, there's also ways to legally create slavery that morally is wrong no matter what. There are people that do get whipped, but many of them enjoy it, and they actually communicate that they enjoy it.
Is have
Yeah,
nothing to do with us. That is.
exactly. That's a different topic for another time. That pray to God we will never have on this
I
show.
was gonna say,
Um,
wait a second, did I miss one of the people we have coming up?
I try to keep this as family friendly as possible. So one of my things is no erotica. Honestly, nothing like that. Uh, some of the spicier stuff I try to stay away from as much as possible, but I understand in romance it will come up sometimes, i.e., Danielle. Some of her stuff sometimes.
No, that was aura blending, and that was the funniest. Okay, guys, you have to read this because her warrior angels that have become the Fae, the fallen angels on Earth, have never had sex. They were angels. So,
Yeah,
to explain how sex works, they used military terms to describe the process, and I promise you, you will not regret it. It was the most amazing passage I have ever read in my life, and you will laugh because
yeah,
you will feel so bad. These people are centuries years old, never
yeah,
had sex, are so embarrassed to talk about it that they use military terms. Please look it up. Just look it up.
yeah. It's locked out of heaven. Was it the first book or the second book that
No,
it's remembered
it
that?
was From the Ashes.
From the Ashes. Okay, that's what it
From
was.
the
Uh,
Ashes by Danielle and Morcino. Look it up. It's Jarvak and Zion talking about it. I promise you that you will not regret it. And let her know that it was epic and hilarious because she doesn't believe me. She was very serious and concise when she wrote it.
I remember when we interviewed her back a while back. It was almost a year ago, I think, when I had Danielle on the show. Uh, she made the comment. It was like it was very interesting to write about that and then have her dad read it and his comments on it. But again, that's a whole different ballgame, a whole different conversation. That hopefully we won't have too many other versions of that. But we want you guys to understand again, common sense, even though it's not so common anymore, it is something that we need to understand, we need to have, because these are the things that keep historical fiction still going today.
And
You have to have
moral.
the research, and in the world in general, yes. But in this specific topic of historical fiction, in regards to the book and talking about slavery and women's rights and the roles that they played during the 1835 in the specific era that we're talking about, abolitionism. There's so many underlying subtext with this book that when we talk to Deirdre Sinnott about her book, The Third Mrs. Galway, you will understand completely why we're talking about it and what we're talking about specific things. Because, again, these are different perspectives. You may see it on stage as two different perspectives of a black woman and a white woman, but the underlying subject is this is a woman writing about women and the roles that they played while understanding your moral compass too and questioning it. So until next time, folks, come find us. You can see all of our stuff on beyondthepenpodcast.com. You can find all of our links. The same thing with a lot of the profiles of the authors that are on there right now and their links to their stuff. We will have Deidre put her stuff up there. Deirdre, I don't know why I say Deidre. Deirdre's profile on there. I know, two different people, I guess. Two different perspectives on her name, too. Uh, and all the things that we could talk about the publishing world and the things that you need to learn. We will have a blog up about things such as what you need to know about book tours, the differences in the reviews that are out there about between the paid as well as the unpaid and how they affect your book. All these little tidbits, you can find them on our blog sheets. And until then, thank you for joining this time with me and Chelsea, the walking vial of chaos with a diplomatic immunity, and any other things that we can possibly add to the labels to her name.
I'm looking for about 15 titles now, so we'll figure it out.
We'll work on it. We'll work on it. So until next time, folks, keep writing, keep inspiring, keep sharing, and keep learning about the world around you because that is going to help you unleash your creativity.